Today's art journal tutorial is especially great for beginners. We're going to use one stencil, one stamp, one napkin, and we're going to make this vintage feel art journal page. Let's get started. I'm working in my 9x12 Canson Mixed Media art journal. I've taken it off the coils. I've selected this geranium napkin from NinnysNapkins. I've taken off the two excess plies, and now I'm just water cutting it with a liner brush. And I'm doing this because I want to take out some elements of this napkin, and then I'm going to recompose the napkin however I see fit for the composition of the page and the orientation and however I want to set it up. And really, there's no shortcut here. It's a little scary to cut apart the napkin, but once you do, it's very freeing because you can see all the possibilities. I noticed that this butterfly that was sitting on my desk in my stash, the colors match perfectly with the geranium. So I'm cutting out several sizes of this and playing with the orientation. I've decided to go with a vintage background, and I'm doing a bit of a cheater on that because what I'm going to do is glue down a variety of torn vintage printables. I've searched Pinterest, I've gotten some from blogs where people have given them for free. There are Facebook groups where people share ones that they've created. There's lots of ways of getting them. You can even collect old books from thrift shops and use them, either photocopy them and glue them down or just rip them up and use them. Here I'm wanting different colors. Some are more yellow, some are more brown. There's some gray tones in this. My goal here is simply to cover the entire surface. I like the ripped edges, that gives texture. My goal here, though, is to get more than texture. I want some of the pattern, the letter, the script. I want that to peek through in the end. I'm going over the edges because I'll cut off the excess. And where I have the taped edge, where I've taped off the part that goes to the coils, I'm going to cut the paper straight because I don't want it to go over the tape. I'm using fluid matte medium from Liquitex to glue all of this down. I prefer fluid matte medium. It dries fairly quickly. You can use gel medium. You just might have to add a little bit of drying time. As you can see, I've pretty much covered the entire background. I'm wrapping my fluid matte gel brush just because I know I'm going to need it later on and I don't want to throw it in the water. I've decided on the size of the butterfly and I decided to go with the big one. I'm liking the look of this geranium on this background. I really don't need to add much to this background to get the feel that I'm going for. But I do want to add some texture. Now in that tub is gesso. It's a store brand economy gesso. And what has happened is it thickens over time. And I absolutely love it. But you can buy, if you gesso that is extra thick or thick gesso. And I'll put some links to that in the description box below. As well, this stencil called Dotted Rings, I'll list that as well. I'm just pushing the thick gesso through the stencil with my finger. I'm not too worried about getting this exact. I want the contrast with the white against the background, and I want the texture. Now this texture plate is from Carabelle Studios, and I am brayering on black acrylic paint, and then I'm pressing it down with the brayer on here. I want that black and white. I want a fairly neutral background. Now I couldn't find this one in Amazon, so I found one I believe it's called Flower Tiles, and I'll link to that one as well as the other Carabelle Studio texture plates that I have and you will see me using. At this point, I'm really liking the background. Take time to clean your stamps if you've used them with acrylic paint. Now, part of this was a little too dark that was right underneath where the geranium napkin was going. So I'm just adding a little bit of gesso to lighten it up and just adding a little gesso here and there as I see fit. This is going to add texture. It's going to push back some of that black if I think I've gotten a little bit too much. And I'm giving this a quick dry before I add the next layer. I don't always show when I'm drying, but I want people to know that in between the layers, I am drying. Love, love, love how that geranium pops against that very neutral background. Again, I grab my fluid matte medium, I flip over the napkin, and I put some on top. Now, napkins are very fragile, and you're going to see what happens if you're not gentle with them. And right there, I've ripped it. But don't worry. I'm going to show you how to fix that if it happens. And here I'm just adding a couple pieces of napkin just to round out my composition. So I'm just grabbing from the napkin a piece of the red and just gluing it down. Later on, I'm going to add some paint, and you're not even going to know that I tore that napkin. Now for the background, I decided to was going to use all burnt umber, but I grabbed the gray and the burnt umber plus my white gesso, and I'm rubbing that in. And OMG, the gray just makes it. And where did I get that idea from? It was from those vintage printables that were there. There were some that were fairly gray. They almost looked a little purpley, but it's very neutral. And I really like the color. Still playing with the orientation. Should I put 3 butterflies? That just looked like too many. So I'm back to my one larger butterfly. Now, just like the vintage printables, you can get butterflies. They can be from magazines. They can be from calendars. They can be from free printables. You could take pictures of them yourself. Some come from napkins. But there are lots of butterflies online, different colored ones that can go with pretty much any art journal pattern. Now, if you don't have the geranium napkin, you can use any flower in the corner. Build it up in a similar orientation and find a butterfly or a dragonfly that coordinates. Now, when I put the gesso through with this dotted ring stencil, and then I paint it over it, I want it to bring back some of that white for contrast. So I'm placing the stencil over top of it and stenciling with white acrylic paint just to bring this out, make the texture stand out a little bit more. Alternatively, I would have colorized the background first and then done the white gesso on top. But I love this pattern. The stencil definitely has kind of a vintage feel. The dots on that dotted ring stencil match the dots that are on the butterfly. So now I'm going to go over the geraniums with a combination of the orange, the red, and the yellow oxide. And I'm just almost stippling it on, very loose. I'm not painting petals. I'm just, taking the brush and stamping it on, mixing the paints right on the brush. Sometimes I add a little bit gesso. If I don't like the color, I'm going to let it dry and come back to it. Here I got a little heavy-handed with gesso. I'm going to let that dry and then come back with more color. Anyone can do this. This is not too precise, but there are no real petals on this geranium that you can make out. And so for abstract, and the finished product looks like it's been painted as opposed to just glued on. Not every bit of each flower is being covered with paint either, and that adds to the textury feeling. Textury, is that a word? So before I glue the butterfly down, I am auditioning the sentiment, and I grabbed this sentiment. It's from sentiment pack number 2, and I'll put a link to where you can go and check out all my sentiment packs at NinnysNapkins and get them as digital downloads. Buy them as digital downloads. This had the script stamp, and that seemed to fit the vintage feel as well as the sentiment. Do small things with great love fit the feel of the page. I think this combination of how this all came together would be perfect on a canvas. And I definitely will be doing that on a canvas at some point in time. That's what I use my art journaling for. I test out ideas, and if something really works and comes together, then those are the things that I choose to do on canvases. Now I'm adding a little bit of black shading to the geranium flowers. Time to glue everything down, the butterfly, as well as the sentiment. I love how all with those vintage printables in the back, you can see the script and the patterning and whatever, all that lusciousness that was there, you can still see it. This is a very different background for me. I don't usually go neutral. I don't usually go light where you see the layers from coming through. Now I'm shading around the butterfly using the floating acrylic shading technique. And this really makes the butterfly pop. Gives it a little bit more weight on the page. I chose not to paint over the greenery on the geranium napkin. I just wanted variation. Now I'm taking gold and just tapping on the geranium a little bit. It's adding a little bit of bling. It's adding the shading. It kind of matches that yellow oxide that I used. Heating the tape to remove it so it doesn't rip off any tape paper. And just adding a little more shading with my General's charcoal pencil. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you love this as much as I do. Give it a try. You can substitute your own butterfly, your own napkin, floral napkin, or check out what I've used in the description box below. Bye for now.